Okay, wait, hold on, not yet.
It says streaming live on Facebook.
Yes, it will be. Okay, and I believe it is live now. So I'm going to opt out.
Woohoo!
Enjoy, guys, and I'll see you in the chat. So mute my...
Thanks, Rose.
No worries.
I don't know about you guys, but this is my first time doing a live on Facebook. It just seems like so daunting. People are watching now. Hello, everyone. Maybe we should start with some introductions here, so we're not just babbling and they're like, who are these people? Well, my name's Michaela, but I'm not important today. We've got some two amazing guests today. We've got Bryan Roberts, who is a counsellor and wellbeing officer at a local school here in Victoria. Hello, Bryan.
Hello.
And to the left of my screen, I don't know however people are seeing this, but we've got Dr. Torben Bergland, and he is the Associate Health Director of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists worldwide. I was like, oh, what conference? But it's like the global thing there in America. So thanks so much for joining us.
I have to say, I'm not here because I'm in the General Conference, it's because I'm a psychiatrist, I think.
Oh, yeah.
That's my qualification.
I feel like, peace in the pandemic, that's something that would be good to talk about, have an expert opinion there. So obviously, can you mind just telling us where you're from, Torben?
Yeah, well, I'm originally from Norway. So I've worked in Norway for many years as a psychiatrist, a medical doctor. But then since 2016, I worked for the church, first in what's called the Trans-European Division, that's sort of half of Europe. And then since 2018, working for the General Conference, that is the world headquarters of the Adventist Church. So I'm with health issues, especially mental health issues. That's been my focus.
Yeah, that's so good.
And what about you, Bryan? How did you get involved in what you're doing over in the schools here in Victoria?
Yeah, so I've been studying a Masters of Counselling, and so that's where I'm coming from. And this year I've been working in a secondary school, in a high school here in Victoria. And of course, we're now in lockdown, and everyone's learning from home, very disrupted, and it's been exciting times as a wellbeing officer in a high school.
Perfect. Well, it sounds like we have two speakers here who can definitely shed light on the topic of peace in pandemic, what we're going to talk about. Global pandemic, I don't know about you guys, but this is my first one. I've never experienced a global pandemic before. And I'm going to say probably everyone else listening to this live has also never experienced that. I'm sure it's got so many different things that come from that. Not only just physical disruptions, but, disruptions to your mental health as well. So this is what we're going to talk about today. And I think it's a good to assume that things don't always go according to plan. Good example is, this Facebook Live starting at 11:30 instead of 11. Do you mind letting us know how your evening's been over there in the States?
Well, this afternoon I went to the beach with a friend, and then we had planned plenty margin, what we thought was plenty margin to get home, but then there was a car accident. We weren't involved with, but a couple of other cars, and then the roads were blocked, and we were stuck in 2 hours in traffic. So that's why I just managed to get home. And thank you for being patient and postponing, so I could be with you for real.
No worries. For us in Victoria, Bryan included, we're in stage 4 lockdown. So when you said beach, I was just so jealous. I was like, no, I want to go to the beach. But we are pretty locked down here. So we will talk a bit more about that. But, things don't always go according to plan. But hopefully by the end of this, you guys are going to give us some insight on how we can deal with our mental well-beings in the middle of when things aren't going according to plan. So I think a good starting place would be to talk about anxiety. I mean, we hear the term anxiety a lot, but we'll perhaps start with you, Torben. What is it when we say anxiety? Well, what does that even mean?
Well, I think we need to sort of distinguish between normal anxiety and sort of what we'd say pathological or anxiety when it becomes an illness. Anxiety is something we all need. That's what keeps us alive. Like when we hear a loud sound or something unexpected happens, sort of we are activated. We are ready to what you often say, fight or flight is the responses we typically have when anxiety is triggered. So that is basically, it's something we need for survival. And it's important that sort of be able to tolerate like the normal levels of anxiety, because when bad things happen, which they do, unexpected things happen for me, like I had sort of some anxiety. Well, what happens now? Because I'm late. I see I'm late for this talk. Are the Australians going to be angry with me, or what's going to happen? But these are normal everyday anxieties that we have. But when we're talking about anxiety as an illness, that's when this sort of becomes excessive worry or fear for either something specific or something in general. In a way, this is when anxiety doesn't help you. When you are fearful or worry about things to an extent that just it's in itself becomes a problem. That's when we're starting to think this is becoming more an illness, a disorder. It's becoming a destructive element instead of protecting you and helping you to manage whatever it is. Then it's starting to become your enemy. But sort of it's kind of where you cross the line that can be a difficult thing, and you can be crossing back and forth also in that. So I think, like many of us, we are experiencing various kinds of anxieties in this time. It's only to be expected, and that's just normal, and it's even healthy. But we need to monitor sort of if it becomes excessive, then we probably need to think extra about what to do about it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Torben. It's spot on. And yeah, I like to think of it in terms of, is my anxious thoughts preventing me from doing what I need to do? Is it stopping me from functioning to get what needs to be done? Because like Torben said, if you're alive today, be thankful, because, it's anxiety that helps keep us functioning and doing things. Any day-to-day actions, we're stimulated by fight or flight responses. We're responding to threats. So that's all part of our anxious feelings, anxiety. And like Torben said, that's quite healthy. Torben, how can we know when we're moving from, what's healthy, what's good, to what's then inhibiting us?
I think that is the crucial question also, in terms of when do you need possibly to seek professional help, counseling, therapy, and evaluation on this. And I would say, like in general, with mental illness, not just anxiety, but other kinds also, it's when it's sort of compromising your ability to function, as you mentioned, or your quality of life to some extent. So those two, one or both of them, if you have like your ability to function normally, or your quality of life, when it's your quality of life is diminished because of it, that's definitely when it's time to consider seeking help, and don't delay it. Sort of don't just try to wait it out. Sort of if this is a pattern you see that lasts for weeks, even a few weeks, then that it may be appropriate definitely to seek help. And it's like there are many things that can be done also. So there's much that can be done both with anxiety and other kinds of mental illness.
Before we go and touch base on kind of what can be done to deal with this, there's just two questions I have. Number one, firstly, so I've heard of anxiety disorder, and some people have anxiety disorder. In the midst of a global pandemic, though, I imagine there's a lot of people that maybe are listening, and they might think, oh, I don't have mental health issues. I've never had problems with mental health before, but now I find myself in a state of mind where I'm not feeling quite myself. My routine's out of whack. I'm not able to go out and see friends and family. Is it possible to have seasons of anxiety where you might not necessarily acknowledge that that's what it is, but you're in that? Like, is it possible to go between stages of having anxiety or not?
Yeah, sure. That is sort of for like you have some of the more like chronic forms, people have long term, but like it definitely it can specific things happen. Your activation, your alertness, it sort of increased for a while, and like this pandemic definitely we'll see many people will suffer more. It can trigger something new, or it can activate something that already was there. So I think this is the time we're living in is a crisis. Sort of it is, and a crisis means sort of we need to figure out ways to cope and deal with things in ways we're not quite prepared for it. We need to sort of invent strategies for dealing with this, and that applies to all of us. Some are struggling more than others for sure in this because of all kinds of reasons. But definitely sort of that it's increased now, that's to be expected, and that's what we see also around the reports are there are more people struggling.
And would you say that it's okay to not be okay in these circumstances?
It's expected. Like you said at the beginning, Michaela, like you haven't lived through a pandemic before, you know. Not, I mean, unless you're, I guess, you know, almost coming up to 100 years old and went through the Spanish flu, that was kind of the last time we had something on this sort of scale. So for most of us, we don't have a pattern for understanding what we're going through, and our brains are pattern seeking, you know, organs. We're looking for ways, like what Torben said, to cope. And that's when we know how things work. And so when we're in a time where we don't know how things work, that feels like a threat to our minds. And of course, we go into that fight or flight response. And when we're staying in that for an extended period of time, you know, we get worn out.
Now, Bryan, you obviously work in school, so you deal with a lot of students. If I'm a student listening to this, what have you seen to be kind of like the characteristics, the symptoms that you've seen, which might suggest that someone is experiencing anxiety?
That's a great question. So do you mean are you asking this in the context of the situation we're in right now, or just in general?
I feel like both will do, but I think surely some of them will kind of overlap.
Yeah,
that
sure.
Experience with any anxious circumstance would be similar.
So typically for students, for young people, this can range. It ranges. You know, it can be something that happens before an exam, before a test, where, you know, we're feeling like the heart starts to beat faster, sweaty palms, we're nervous, we're dreading what's going to happen, and we start to black out or stop functioning. That's a form of anxiety, you know. Or there's more like socialized anxiety, where we have these feelings of not being able to participate or wanting to be included in groups of people. We want to be included, but you know, like interacting with others, you know, is difficult because we feel insecure, we feel like we're not good enough, we feel like we're going to be rejected. So that's kind of like, yes, it looks like many different sort of things. Right now in the pandemic, it can look like fear of the future. What am I going to do next year if you're, you know, graduating from high school? It could look like, how am I going to get through this term? How am I going to study at home? You know, I need to walk around. I need to be out of the house, but, you know, I'm stuck here in looking at this screen all day.
Are there any physical, so Torben, are there any physical signs or symptoms of anxiety that you could, if maybe I wasn't experiencing them myself, but is there something I could be looking out for in my loved ones and my friends and family, which might make me realize that maybe we need to check on them, touch base with them, see if they're okay? What do we look out for?
I think sort of what's important to recognize is that people tend to hide the problems they're struggling with. So it can be very difficult to spot it in others, especially as people are more like older, young adults. Like we have we develop a capacity to sort of to monitor what we show to the world. So like in the best way to sort of identify if you get like this gut feeling or concern or something, that is something going on with this person, then ask about them, like talk with them, ask how are you doing, are you struggling with something. And you can also say, I think a good thing is to express like I've been worried about you, like I don't know quite, maybe like you can say I don't know why quite, but there's something that makes me wonder how you are doing. So I think, but otherwise, if you look for like behavioral things, like it's people withdrawing, people not engaging, people being distant, that kind of things, and especially if you look at younger people and kids, then I think you can, like, then we often have to look at these behavioral patterns, because if you ask how are you feeling, like kids can struggle to express that in words because they haven't that self-awareness and that emotional awareness. That's not developed yet. So that's why mental illness in kids and teenagers can often be more like behavioral expressions of it than you may see in adults. But like the underlying issues can still be very much the same.
Yeah. Is something being avoided? You know, am I avoiding something, or is my friend or a loved one, what are they avoiding that's impacting on how they're functioning through the day?
How do you,
Sorry, Torben was going to jump in there.
Yes, I just to follow up with what Bryan said earlier, like the fear about the future. I think that's a big one that we are facing, like all of us in a way. And like if we use a nice word for it, like say existential anxiety, sort of what will life look like in this world in the years to come? And that's something we simply don't know. We don't, at this point, we don't know what this world is going to look like. And I think for some of us who have lived longer, we have sort of a long experience with what is normal. But when, if you're a teenager entering into adult life, this has a much greater impact, I think, and shapes this concern about the future. Like I've lived a couple of decades as an adult. Like I know what that's, I have some references. But for many young people who enter into that phase of life now where they leave the safety of the home, someone who protects them, they enter into a world that seemingly is more scary than it's been for many of us. And that I think I wonder really how that is going to shape this, like, I don't know if you can say COVID-19 generation, or what it is. Sort of like we have to, but it's going to have impact for sure. In what way? I'm not sure.
You were saying before, I think, Bryan, you were mentioning that noticing whether your loved ones or your friends are a bit more distant than they usually are, and that's like maybe a sign. For us here in Victoria specifically, where there are stage 4 lockdowns, we're not interacting face to face with people. How can we see that, or what do we look out for then when we are having our conversations via Zoom, via online chats? How can we tell if someone's going through something like this when we don't have the ability to see them face to face?
Yeah, sure. I think when we're having conversations, or if we're not having conversations, then we're missing out on something that's really important for our health. So if I think in this lockdown period, if you're alone, if you're by yourself, or you're isolating yourself in your living environment, just take note of that and be wary of, am I reaching out to people? Am I communicating with people? Okay, so that's one thing. But like Michaela, what you're saying there is, in the conversations that we are having, you know, for most of us, we're Zooming, or we're, you know, talking on the phone or messaging. I think at this present moment, and it's certainly, I think, in Australia as well, when we ask, are you okay? We kind of end up answering that as a, yeah, no, all good, all fine. Yeah, nah, you know, And I think it's helpful just to be in this time period, just to ask, hey, so where are you struggling, and what are you enjoying about this current time period? What are you hating? What's not working well? And I think that just having a little bit more of a focused question allows each other to express what's working well, what we're enjoying, and what we're not. And it's just a little bit deeper than are you okay? And I think that would be one little thing that is important during this time to in reaching out to one another, is just to dive in a little quicker with something specific, because are you okay it's almost culturally appropriate to brush it off. Thanks for asking, but let's move on. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I think, yeah, you say that to the person doing your shopping, putting your groceries.
Polite.
It's like, hey, how you going? Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, yourself? Yeah, good. And then you walk off. I think sometimes, like, you could be walking past someone and you go, hey, how you going? And then you keep walking like past them. So you're not really intending to find out the truth or actually dive into it. So essentially what you're saying then, Bryan, is when you're going to check up on your friends and your family and your loved ones, make sure you are giving the space for them to answer a question and to ask the right questions that aren't just the, how you going? Good, thanks, goodbye. So that's a good point. I think we all do that. So I think that's something we should really, do you guys have any tips about what are the best questions, kind of open-ended questions that get a more in-depth response?
Do you want to take, I'll have a think about it. Torben, does anything jump to mind?
Well, I would just wanted to, like, on this, how, like, as we are observing, I think what you're saying, Bryan, Michaela, like, be intentional, be direct. And
Absolutely.
It doesn't, like, there's no magic questions.
Yeah.
You went for that, like, just be sincere. That is sort of the best thing, sort of be genuinely interested. Sort of then it doesn't, like, matter so much exactly what you say, but just, like, be caring, be sort of showing that you want a real answer to the question. You're not just looking for the I'm fine kind of response. And then sort of it depends on your personality, who you are, the kind of relationship, also how you are dealing with it. So I trust people can find, but, like, don't be afraid of asking the hard questions. Well, it's okay to be afraid of asking, because it sets us all sort of in a sort of some kind of tension, and sort of we don't know quite what will happen. So even having anxiety, like, if you're going to be asking someone, like, you can have some anxiety in that sort of, how is this going to turn out when I do that? So, and that's, like, even like for me as a psychotherapist, psychiatrist, like, for me, learning to be direct with people, with patients, like, I had to overcome some of my own shyness in that. But what I learned is just go head on. Often is the best thing. Not wrap it in just what you're really wondering about. Ask it in sort of as a sort of just normal thing to ask. Like for me, for example, like, one of the things that often can be a bit awkward when talking to patients is talking about people having suicidal thoughts. Sort of, how do you ask someone about that?
Yeah.
And I think our inclination is often that we wrap it in, or we're not quite sure how to deal with it. Like, I had to learn myself that the best thing is sort of just like have you ever had any suicidal thoughts, or are you having that now? And then maybe trying to normalize it. I understand people have that. I'm wondering how that is for you. Like, that is sort of one of the hard, and can be sort of unpleasant to be that direct. But, like, just my experience is that it's best to just ask it in the simple way, not make a big deal out of it. But then also, like, communicating that it's whatever you answer is okay. I'm here to listen. Like, exactly. I want to hear the truth. I want to hear how you are doing.
And Torben, when you ask me that question, it indicates to me that you're comfortable with hearing my response. And I think that's, Michaela, that's a really, what I like about what Torben's brought up here, because it's one of the most extreme ends of a question. Are you thinking of killing yourself? It's intense, right? But what that does is it says, I feel comfortable to have this conversation with you, and that allows you to feel comfortable with me. What you know, if I ask that, if I tried to get that same, if I tried to have that same conversation by saying, are you thinking of doing something silly? If I was feeling like suicidal, then I'm picking up on the fact that you don't feel comfortable having this conversation with me either, and I don't want to make you feel comfortable. And I think so that's on the extreme end of all the questions that we can ask. But I think the principle is really important there, that the question that we ask indicates our intent, like Torben was saying, to connect. And yeah, sometimes just jumping in and asking a direct question, then indicates to that person, this is a place where I can open up because I've been invited to do so. We're always seeking invitations to reveal ourselves, and the are you okay kind of question. It's sitting up there on the polite, how are you? But it doesn't. To me, it doesn't invite me to open up. I don't know if you're willing for me to share. So yeah, it's a long way of answering that.
Yeah, no, I love what you said though. Like, are you thinking of doing something silly? Like, I think wording it in that way is already, if someone's feeling anxious, they're feeling suicidal. If you say that, it's already like putting up a wall that they kind of don't feel like it's a safe place. They don't feel like they're like that their thoughts are validated. Actually, one of the questions we do have is, in this pandemic, some people would consider themselves lucky, like if they managed to score JobKeeper, what we have, Torben, here in Australia, some kind of payment from the government, or if someone like myself included, I get to work from home. So I'm, in that sense, one of the lucky ones. So what about talk to those people who maybe know that they're in a, like they're better off than others in some sense, but still feel all these feelings, and they might even feel a bit guilty for feeling depressed or anxious when they're in a better, so to speak, situation.
Yeah.
Well, I can like to just like be a bit personal even on that sort of. I've been like through this whole pandemic, I've been on various kinds of talks and then sort of had all these like, this is a crisis, it's going to be difficult. There are all kinds of existential issues are going to come up. You're going to think about your life, about your past, about your future, all these kinds of things. So it's fine for me to go and say all these things, but I've actually had to do it myself. Mm-hmm. I have experienced that myself. Also, even though I have a job, there's nothing sort of major, sort of, I'm much better off also than many others are. But I have to sort of realize that for myself also. This has been, in one way, I appreciate it because it's been an opportunity to do some thinking about sort of how do I live my life? What do I want to do? What is important? How are my habits, my lifestyle habits? How do I manage sort of to live the kind of life I want? How do I stay? Who do I stay in touch with? How do I stay in touch with people? What do people actually mean to me, the friends and family that I have? Like there's all these things in our everyday busyness of life when everything is on track, so that we maybe don't have to deal that much with those things because things are just on the roll. But I think this for all of us, I think this is, I'm more worried about those who don't have any kinds of thoughts. But I'm going to say that they should see a psychiatrist if they are not having any problems. But still, like I just want to normalize this. Say I think that this is just this kind of situation we're in, where these things happen, and see it also as an opportunity, not just as a problem. For myself, it's been like that. Sort of, I have had to work on some things through this time that I sort of think it's good. It's been good for me in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think that's an interesting thought, because I think sometimes people play the comparison game, and then it will make them think that their thoughts aren't valid because their situation isn't as bad. I think there's always like, circumstances aren't bad or worse, they're just different. So my problems might be different to yours, but it doesn't make mine any less valid. Or, if I'm not coping and my circumstances appear to be better, it doesn't mean that I don't have like that the feelings aren't real. So I think even what you're saying, where ask questions in a way where people can be comfortable and safe to share their thoughts and their feelings in a safe place so that they're heard. It's not a case of, oh, someone going back and saying, oh, but you've got this, this, and this, you shouldn't be feeling like this, because that doesn't necessarily change how you feel. So now that's a really interesting thing. In regards to, obviously we are here under Vic Youth, so that implies some form of kind of, knowledge to an extent about some form of, religion, specifically Adventist world, so to speak. For those who maybe see this like mental illness or mental health issues as a lack of faith in God or lack of trust in God in your circumstances, can you speak a bit into that mental health, you can still have mental health issues and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not trusting in God?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating part of like our culture and our faith, our Christianity, all of these influences, and how did these join together? And I think that, and certainly in this time, we're a lot of us, everyone is going through things that we haven't been through before. And so, and like you kind of hinted at, Michaela, this is a time where all of us are sort of facing with these different experiences of, mental health issues. And that's just a broad term, a label, if you will, for what we're feeling, and how does that, if we're experiencing that, does that mean that that we don't have a strong faith? I don't think so. I think that, and I can understand, I think, why Christians might sometimes think that, because Jesus is a healer. Jesus spoke into people's lives and healed them of their mental conditions. And maybe it's tempting to think, well, if then I have a mental condition, does that mean that Jesus isn't healing me, or that I'm not connected to him, or that if I just believe and call on him, that. So I think that might be where the question's coming from. Torben, how would you see that play out?
Well, I think this is a super important question because so many people struggle with that, and around the world, people have this sort of confusion in a way where they merge spiritual health and sort of equate that with mental health. If your faith is okay, then you won't have any mental problems. That is a very common way of thinking. But I really see that, like, to use like a strong word, that's ignorance about how we function. Our mental health is a bodily function. Like our digestion, our blood circulation, all the other things. Our mental health is a product of our brain and what goes on in the brain and the central nervous system and the whole body, because it's all connected in this. And people can have mental health issues while they have a perfect faith. That's perfectly possible. Like, sort of, we know, I think when it comes to physical health issues, most people are sound enough to not blame someone for getting cancer because they don't have enough faith, or you get a heart attack because you don't have enough faith. We are able to make that. Most people are able to make that connection. Some make mistakes also on that, but most of us are sort of able. But I think the problem is when we come into the area of mental health, that many of us have this sort of, we don't acknowledge the seriousness of it. We don't understand that this is really serious issues. These are real illnesses. And because of that, we sort of think that, well, if there's a mental health problem, there's probably some simple fix to that. So like a prayer would probably do and sort of get you to where you want to be, like or if you just read your Bible a bit more, or trust a bit more in God, then all these fears and depression will go away. Of course, I believe that faith is an asset when it comes to mental health, like healthy faith. There are destructive kinds of spirituality and faith also that can harm mental health, and I've seen plenty of those also. So it's the right kind of faith, the right kind of understanding of God that is essential. I think if faith is going to be something positive for your mental health, it's got to be the right kind of faith and a mature kind of faith. But I think we give people a lot of problems, additional problems. If you say, well, I'm having anxiety, and then you say, oh, it's because you don't have enough faith in God, then you
just pray that away.
Yes, you just heaping another burden upon them that they definitely don't need, and it's your own ignorance that make you speak like that. I'm a bit harsh, but I want sort of, we need to sort of eradicate that kind of thinking. It's going to be hard. I don't know what the vaccine for that kind of thinking is either, but we really need to be respectful of people who have, like, mental health issues are serious things, and they cause a lot of suffering. And sort of when we're talking about suicidality, like, it's because people are depressed because they're struggling with mental illness, then they go to that extreme, that because the pain is so severe, that's why people kill themselves, because they're just trying to escape. That doesn't happen very often for physical illnesses. They just put the kind of pain people are experiencing into some kind of perspective. Like, the physical pain often is much easier to deal with than the mental pain people are struggling with. So don't treat mental illness lightly. Take it seriously.
That's really interesting, because even as you were saying about with the cancer patient, you don't necessarily then attribute that to a lack of faith there. I think if you've got a broken leg, you can see someone has a broken leg, they're wearing a cast, so it's very obvious. Whereas mental health is obviously it's something happening in the brain. Obviously, you've got years and years of experience, and so decades cannot be shared in a short Facebook Live. But if you were to give us like a Psychiatry 101, like what's happening to the brain when we have these thoughts? What are we not seeing? What are people feeling that we can't physically see? But maybe if we had a bit more of an understanding of how mental health affects the brain, maybe we can start looking at more how we look at other physical health issues.
Well, we know that there when people have long-term some of the mental illness, that there can be structural changes in the brain. So some parts of the brain can increase in volume. That means sort of they're growing stronger, which is not always a good thing. Or they can shrink and become smaller. That means they're not as active as they used to be. So, and that's why sort of like changing things is often like not just a quick fix, because you have to restructure the brain, you have to regrow your brain in a way, and that's why these things can often take time. So this it's very complex, and sort of to be honest, we don't really know everything that's going on in the brain. We have models, we're talking about neurotransmitters playing a role, and then some say, well, we're not quite sure actually what they're doing and how they function. So this is extremely complicated, and we need sort of to be in awe of this brain. The complication of the brain far sort of exceeds our understanding.
But you're saying that there are physical changes that happen in the brain based on someone's mental state? There can be physical changes?
Well, they can be, and we're not talking about brain damage as such. Like these things are usually reversible, but this is also another argument for not going untreated, or go on untreated. Like if you are struggling with something, for the brain health, for your social health, for your occupational health and well-being, like do something about these things. That's what I like. Sometimes if I break a leg, I would of course go and see a doctor because of that. And I don't just sit down and pray about that. Sort of, God, please fix this leg for me. And I think I'm a better Christian if I just have faith in you rather than going see the doctor. But somehow when it comes to mental health, sometimes we shift like so, okay, we resort to prayer, and that's like good thing, pray, read the Bible, all these things. But like, if God has placed a doctor, a psychologist, a counselor within your reach, sort of, then they make use of it like you would if you had some other kind of issue where you need help. So that's the sad thing about many people with mental illness, that when people can go for years and struggle with these issues, with all the negative consequences of that. And especially that's important with young people. I think if they sense that they are struggling, go to the school counselor, talk with whoever is available about things, because a small change that phase of life can make such a big difference down the road. And sort of don't wait till you're 40 or 50 or whatever to do something.
I like how you said that there can be some reversible, so that there is things that you can do perhaps to help deal with mental illness. I imagine it's a holistic approach, and I really want to talk about that. But just before we go on to that, mentioning for young people, even perhaps things like sleep and routine. If they've noticed, perhaps a parent maybe have noticed that their child pre-COVID used to be up at 7, bed at a good time, could a change in a sleeping pattern be a physical kind of perhaps an indicator that they're dealing with mental illness? For my brother, who might play 14 hours of Xbox during the day, have 3 hours of sleep, could that be a sign of mental issues there? Is there things that we can be looking out for in that sense, which are indicating that they're just not coping mentally?
There's indicators and causes can be quite interlinked. And issue of sleep is, we know that sleep is an important part of maintaining great mental health. Would not having enough sleep indicate anxiety? It could, that's a question that I often ask, is how is your sleep going? Because anxiety can keep people up through the night, can stop people from falling asleep, and not having sleep also starts to wear us out faster and faster. So yes, I guess sleep, diet, social interaction, spending, how you're handling your money, that could also be, all of these things are ways in which we can be seeking to avoid things or seeking to get things to feel better or placate us. So yes, these things could be indicators.
Like in general, when you see behavioral changes one way or the other, that can you hear me?
Yeah, now
That's better.
You see change in behavior, sort of something that's always like, if you're observing someone, then that is a reason to sort of wonder what's going on. And before we talked, like, what do we do when we are not sort of physically together, like see friends, family, colleagues, or so we only meet through Zoom? If you see a change in behavior, either that they sort of are less active, like less, they contact you less, or on the other side, if they start contacting you more, or that they give more, like both of those either way can be indicators that something is going on, and maybe indicators that maybe you should have a talk with a person and inquire sort of how are you doing.
So look at kind of changes to their routine. I know everyone at the moment has had a change to their routine, but just noticing kind of if there's drastic changes in what they're doing and behavior. Okay, that's interesting. Now to touch base on, I think the most important thing of this topic is, we've discussed kind of what is mental illness, what is anxiety, kind of how it can change over time, how it can be seasonal based as well. It's not something, there are some people that might have it for for the remainder of their lives and always have to maybe deal with it. Or there are some being in a COVID situation where they've got feelings that have come up out of nowhere and they maybe haven't experienced it before. Now, for what's really important is kind of how we can go about actually dealing with this. We want to know how we can get peace in the middle of a pandemic, peace in general. What are the physical, spiritual, mental kind of the whole holistic approach? Let's first start with kind of maybe physical ways that we can help improve our mental well-being. Sure.
So as we've touched on, sleep, what we're eating, exercise. And we've been, I'm sure the two of you have also been as bombarded with these things over the internet as I have, but there's goodness in them. Exercise, changing our physical state can change our mental state in the moment and over the long term. So if it's, if it's a rough day, a bad day, getting outside, getting some fresh air, going for a walk, feeling the sun on the face, changes the way we feel, changes our body, that movement. Emotion is emotion, and so that can change the way we feel, it can change the way we think. Getting plenty of water. Our physical needs are so interlinked with our mental needs. And spending time in community, reaching out and connecting is really important. And I'd like to add giving. I think, touching on our faith, Michaela, Jesus taught us that living is about giving. He flipped the way the world works. Rather than taking and taking and taking, he taught us to give and give. And I think that can really help flip us if we're in a funk, in an everyday funk. If we can do something for someone else, reach out and help and serve, whether it's in our home, whether it's our neighbor, whether it's friends around the world, interstate, in 2 doors down, because, basically one and the same now. That helps, that it really does help.
Is there anything else you'd add to that there, Torben?
Well, I think sometimes in issues with anxiety, when we talk about it, it's if you see sort of what is a core issue in anxiety, and sometimes you can say it's attempts to control the uncontrollable. Oftentimes there's things beyond our control, things that scare us. Oftentimes things we cannot really control, but our desire, we want to control, we want to be controlled, we want to be safe. And that sort of is the dilemma we stand in sometimes. I think one thing to sort of try to manage that is to do what you actually can do, sort of, and don't give up. Like there are some things that are not controllable, but then there are some things that are controllable. And I think, like Bryan mentioned, all these lifestyle habits, social habits, spiritual habits that we have, like you can do something with that. And if you sort of are proactive and do those things that can make you feel that you are more in control in a way, even though there's still some things that you cannot control, then at least you're doing what you can with these things. The problem is when this is becoming like more like a disorder and illness, often is that you often give up on those things, the positive things you can do. Also, we cannot control this pandemic. We can control our behaviors. You can respect the quarantine, you can wear a mask, you can wash your hands, you can be sort of careful about who you interact with, but also all these other things, just eating properly, having meals, keeping it nice and clean and tidy around you, getting sleep, not staying up on Netflix and other kinds of things because you're bored or whatever. Like getting sleep, exercise, and especially exercise with anxiety is very good, because some of the symptoms, physical symptoms of anxiety, often like heart beating, sweating, some of these things that also are sort of the responses to physical activity. and sometimes people become stressed because they have these symptoms when they have anxiety, and actually exercising can be a way of developing more tolerance for these things. So you're not sort of, if your heart starts beating, you don't sort of freak out because of that, or you start sweating and said, well, I've done this before, I'm fine, I'll get through this also.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's like exercise is training you for those moments when you have those anxious thoughts where you're used to feeling. Then if you're having that a part of your daily routine, it's less of a scary thought that's just kind of come on you. It's like, okay, it maybe help you ground yourself as well with that.
And if I can just like another, just from my own life, an example, like how I in a way overcame the fear of being in front of people, public speaking. Like I was super shy when I was a kid. I never spoke in class because I was shy and sort of a nervous type. But then once I was doing a scripture reading in front of a big audience, and my knees started shaking. And I didn't know why, I didn't understand why, but it was probably some kind of nervous reaction. And to me, then I realized like they're shaking, and then I thought, oh, well, let's like just let them shake. Who cares? There's no problem. Like just let them shake. And I know people saw that, but I said, well, that's no problem. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And for me, that was a breakthrough in being in front of the audience. Like some people say, like speaking in public, that's the biggest fear they have. Fear number 2 is dying. That's actually what I ask people. But then like just tolerating these emotions. Like if your heart is beating, if you're sweating, well, just try to tell yourself it's okay. This too will pass. Sort of this just being in there. But oftentimes when people have anxiety, then they start trying to control the symptoms in a way and doing everything possible that they don't have heartbeats or sweating or what these things are. But that sort of, if you can be a bit more relaxed about that, that can be a great help in order to be able to manage.
Now, like we said, control what you can control. And I think maybe that is an example of a positive kind of spiritual health there, where you trust God with the things that are out of your control. Like in the middle of a pandemic, unless you're working on a vaccine or you're kind of involved in that sense, like there's not a lot that you can do, and you need to maybe be okay with that, or learn to be okay with what you can't change, and to just try focus on the things that you can. So I think sleeping, eating well, if that's something that's in your control to do, that could really help boost your mood there. No, that's really great. In terms of what maybe not to do, I'm sure that there are things that maybe would heighten anxiety thoughts. Even with the news, every day we've got updates from our premier, updates from the PM about how like scary the world's getting, and I imagine that causes quite a bit of anxiety. What are some things that we can avoid doing that will actually help with our mental well-being?
Well, I think in terms of the news, like that can become like a vicious cycle, a spiral that you get into, because you're anxious. You watch the news because you want to know everything's going on, and then what you hear makes you more anxious, and then sort of you're in a bad loop on these things. I think how we use media these days is very important, especially if you're quarantined, you're home, sort of you have maybe a lot of time on your hands. You have to really work on that maybe, and make a decision, like how much time will I spend on news or other things, all kinds of social media or all kinds of media, including social media, what you do. So I would think like there's, again, if what I know about this pandemic, sort of I in a way I don't need to know a whole lot in order to get myself through. I need to know what the current recommendations are locally, what I can do, what I can't do, what is sort of the behavior that is recommended. Beyond that, but like don't drown in news. Sort of nothing good comes out of that, and it just will make things worse. But it's easy to get trapped in it, for sure.
So maybe if you're someone who's feeling anxious, if you're listening to this and you've been maybe like me, where as soon as the updates are on, I'm out there watching the whole live, all the Q&As and everything. If you're finding that you're responding to that and you're listening, maybe try and tone down on what you're viewing. Maybe get like a 5-minute update a day if you really need to know, but then don't spend your whole day focusing on that, because it is out of your control there, and, you know, focus on what you can do to help. If anyone has as well any questions as well that we haven't touched on, please send them through. Now would be great before we kind of wrap this up. But I do just want to talk to the both of you. We'll start with Bryan. What are you doing and how are you finding kind of peace during this season?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, the last couple of weeks, as things have tightened up, you know, I'd heard a lot of my friends and people around me saying that, you know, that it's harder, that they're not enjoying it, that it's that they're suffering, and for me, like, I hadn't felt too disrupted. And so I was, you know, I felt like, well, I'm not really being affected here. And I'm struggling to empathize with those that are. And so, you know, I was going along quite well. And then in the last couple of days, it just sort of came over me, overwhelmed me. And I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like I was doing good work. And I was just not as pleasant to be around, right? And I think that through this season, we find ourselves moving through these places of, we're doing well, we're having days where we're coping all right, and we're doing fine, and then there's days where it's just not going so well, you know. And I think it's important just to recognize those days when it's just not going so well. Sometimes we can burn a lot of energy trying to fight that, but sometimes it's okay just to accept, you know what, today is not my day, and that's okay. So for me, you know, what I like to do is, when I do get out of bed, I like to make that bed, and I know that I've got a made bed to come back to that night, so that no matter what happens through the day, there's like an ability to restart the next day, or doing something before I go to bed to prepare, you know, whether it's washing the dishes or, you know, doing something for someone else in the house, where it's just going to set up the day to come. And that's something to look forward to. It's something to just feel a little bit more peaceful about. And so those are little habits that I have, that I use just to bring about some consistency and some order. But for me, honestly, peace in this pandemic for me looks like learning and studying and modeling my life and character on that of Jesus. And so for the last 3 or 4 weeks, been reading through the Gospels about the life of Jesus, and I just love who he is, and I found that actually has brought me a lot of peace, because it's something to model myself after. I learn who God is, and I like it, and it gives me purpose in this time. And purpose is really important for getting through anything, because coming back to where we started, we haven't been through this before. We don't know what it's looked like, but it actually has happened before. It's happened many times before through human history, and we will get through it. And it's nice to have, for me, a bigger picture in mind and a purpose to align myself into.
That's great, Bryan. And I'm sure as well, your wife is very grateful that you're doing the dishes and making the bed. She'd be happy with that. And what about you, Torben? What are you doing? What's kind of some systems in place that you have in this season during this pandemic that are keeping you grounded, keeping you as mentally well as you can, physically well? What are your tips?
Well, like Bryan mentioned, perspective, and I think that's sort of important to remember, like in the big perspective of the world's history, like this is not really a big thing. This pandemic, so we are we are flooded in the media and everything about that, and appropriately. I'm not saying that this pandemic is no small thing. It's a big challenge, and it's very disruptive, and it is because it has to be. We don't have good ways to manage it, otherwise things will be a mess and chaos, as there are some parts of the world, and we don't want to go there. So but still trying to keep things somewhat in perspective, sort of at some point, sort of as Christians, we believe like the end of the world is coming at some point. I don't believe that this is the big thing that we're facing, because like the world has been at sort of major crises before that have been worse than this one. But many of our lifetimes, this has been the most significant thing and most disruptive thing that we've had. But like trying to keep like some perspective on things. And then I think for myself also, like it's been I see my devotional habits have improved, become more addicted to devotionals in the morning. I can't say I had that before, but that's a good addiction. I think like feeling that I really want to have that start of the day, like exercising. I think I'm in better shape now than when the pandemic started. I'm in better shape than I've been in a while. So that's also like an opportunity to do good things. And then like staying in touch, being intentional about staying in touch with family and friends. That has been very important for me. That's been one of my strategies, is like trying every day to see a face, a familiar face that I know. Sort of not I can't do that in person every day, but at least on the screen to have that interaction. And I'm not where I've been. It's not been like this total lockdown where you can't leave the house. So for me, one strategy has also been like to get out of the house at least once a day, and do something, exercise or something else, to get so that it doesn't just become sort of a monotonous thing that everything is the same. There's no difference. There's no rhythm to things. I think that's important, to create structure and to keep some rhythms. I think that is very important. But then still, like peace is not sort of, I would say it's not sort of a state of mind, sort of that you sort of, well, I'm experiencing peace now, and I expect this should at least last the next 5 years. This is like, if you read the Bible, read the stories of the people in the Bible, they were quite distressed, many of them, most of the time, seeming. So like the normal in this world is not peace.
Exactly right. That's right. I think that's worth emphasizing, Torben, that life is not peaceful all the time. Yeah.
No, so we have to, like, this life in this world is a challenge. It's hard, and as from a Christian perspective, well, it is because the world is not the way God intended the world to be. The world is very different. Like this pandemic is very different from what God wanted for this world, and it changes things. So, but like these moments of peace, if we can have them, whenever that is, if it's when we are in contact with others, if we're in contact with God, if we're having devotional, like savor those moments of peace if you're out in nature or where it is, but don't sort of create sort of this almost performance anxiety that this is the way life is supposed to be, and if not, I'm a failure, or my faith is a failure, or my spirituality is a failure. Life is hard, and it's a challenging, and so we have to get through it, but we get best through it if we do together with someone, God and other people.
I love that, doing things together. Yeah, sorry, Bryan.
Well, I think peace in a pandemic is also an action that we can take, that we can bring peace in this pandemic to others. And I think that's important in just small ways. If we can bring peace into chaos, it's very satisfying, it's very fulfilling, and and it's very serving to one another.
I think so. What you guys are talking about, you know, I love what you said, Torben, about seeing a face every day, like that idea of trying to still be in touch with those that, you know, you would usually be in touch with, because we are relational beings. We are created to be in the company of others. So that's so important as well for our mental health, you know, so to get good exercise routines in there, kind of set, you know, make the bed like Bryan does, do things to have some form of routine in your life. One question that we did get asked in regards to thinking about like things like meditation, for example. Some people might find that a very peaceful practice, but is there like a biblical standpoint to that? Is there something that meditation can be done if someone finds that as their way of, you know, experiencing peace? How does that go from like a biblical perspective? I'm not sure who wants to jump in on that one.
Well, I think meditation, like there's a very strong Christian tradition for meditation. Sort of, it's also, you find that in other religions, but just because it's in other religions doesn't mean that it's bad. Sort of, I think from a Christian perspective, we can have a very good and better version of it. And I think this is something that is important. Like we are hyper stimulated in the way we live, most of us. Like we have our devices, we are bombarded with information, and that sort of makes our brains sort of run in high speed all the time. And I think meditation, mindfulness practices that we see around the world, it's because people are the mind is so busy all the time that people enjoy it so much when you can calm down the mind, focus on something, not sort of being distracted by everything going on all the time. So I think definitely from like a Christian perspective, we should encourage meditation. That doesn't mean you have to go into some New Age thing or Eastern religion kind of thing, but things where you focus on the present, on the moment, where you notice your thoughts, notice your bodily feelings, your sensations, where you are, notice what is going on around you. This is what it's called mindfulness. And some sort of get a bit sort of concerned when they use that kind of word, but in the essence, but this like being in the present, fully aware, fully conscious, fully with all your senses activated in a positive sense, that's something we need to cultivate. And it's a very good also anti-anxiety thing. We know that from research, from what we call mindfulness practices, that kind of things, also that it's very effective on calming down things and making people be more in touch with themselves, what they feel, what they think, where they are. So I would encourage meditation, but like doing it it can be like a walk in nature, can be reading a Bible, reading a poem, really just focusing, being fully present on something positive in a conversation, being fully present. Don't have the phone beside you, don't check your messages, switch off notifications, switch off the phone, turn it off, all your devices, being just fully in the moment with someone or whatever you're doing. That's good meditation.
Do you have any, and I've heard kind of some psychiatrists before, or psychologists, counselors have like some techniques or something to keep you grounded? Like if you're going through a real anxious state, is it like, you know, you see 5 things, smell something, taste, like, do you have like a practical little task that you can do when you feel yourself getting heated up, when you feel yourself getting quite anxious, that kind of helps you ground it?
Yeah, I use this with my students often. And there's a couple that I use, and one is a progressive relaxation that starts in the toes, and involves just tensing your muscles, tensing your toes really tight, feeling that tension and noticing that tension, and then releasing that and noticing that release, and then working slowly up the body. Then in your calf muscles, tensing those, noticing, releasing, all the way up your legs, your pelvis, your stomach, your chest, your face. That helps to calm down and to be present. Breathing is a really, really important and helpful activity. And just for the sake of this helps me to remember, is to think of a square. It has 4 sides. And so I like to think of number 4, and I breathe in for 4 seconds. Then I hold it for 4 seconds. I breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold it for 4 seconds. So that's another way of just the breath helps to relax and calm down. And yes, like you said, Michaela, grounding exercises where you're looking around the room and trying to count, what you can see. Okay, here's a window, here's a window. How many PowerPoints are there around the floor? What color are the walls? What am I sitting on? Is it hard? Is it soft? Just noticing those things around you. It's good to help ground you. If there's those moments where you're feeling anxious and you're not sure how to stay in control, and you know that you just need to be able to calm down for a moment so that you can then move forward.
Mm. Yeah,
just
right.
to sort of what you're saying, Bryan, with deep breathing, like deep, slow breathing, that directly activates the part of the nervous system that calms you down.
Mm.
And sort of it counterbalances the fight and flight systems that we have. So it's very direct, immediate physiological response you can have to that. So I think that's one. All you say are good examples. Just adding that it actually works. It directly impacts. That example of one of the things you do that immediately has a physiological effect in your body.
Mm. I'm going to try that when I get off this, kind of like deep breathe out, just to see. I'll be, my people I live with were like, what am I doing? I'm just sitting there doing this, but hey, I feel like it's going to be relaxing. Cool.
Breathe through your stomach, like pull it down. Don't lift your shoulders.
Bend my shoulders. Okay.
Okay. Like let it fill your lungs and let your belly come out. That's don't hold your belly. Let everything out.
I'll practice later. I'm gonna. This will be my new technique. Before we wrap it up, just if someone's been listening to this and maybe before this conversation, they were like, "Surely I'm not experiencing anxiety." They maybe have never mentioned, never really been aware of it before. What's the best next step for someone to take after listening to this, hearing about anxiety, hearing about certain ways to manage it? What is the best next step for a person to take? Would it be, if they've experienced this for a few weeks now, to contact a psychiatrist, contact a counselor, speak to someone, a relative? What's the next practical move for someone?
Bryan, I don't know, the Australian system, so I don't know what is
sure.
the path to get help.
Yeah, well, firstly, I mean, we all experience anxiety. That's the first thing to know. So that's normal, as we've covered off here. Okay, so the question is my anxiety, is my anxious thoughts stopping me from seeing people, from getting out of bed, from doing what needs to be done? Am I avoiding things? And if that's starting to change the way you act and feel over the long term, then if you can see, get some professional help. So if you go to your doctor, if you're in Australia, you can go to your doctor and you can get a mental health plan, okay? And that will the doctor will prescribe you. You can see a counsellor, you can see a therapist, a psychologist, and you'll get, I think, up to 10, visitations that Medicare will pay for, okay? So you see your GP and you can get a mental health plan. Otherwise, if you want to just see a mental health professional, you can go up and pay for it yourself. That's no problem too. But if you want to go through the Medicare system, you go to your local doctor and they can refer you.
And for those who, I mean, like myself, I always try to use like the doctors as like the last option. I mean, obviously, doctors, there's definitely a need for them. Dr. Torben, I'm sure that there's many patients who are very very glad for what you've done. But for those who want to just take, before they get to the stage where they're seeing a doctor, maybe there's just steps that they can take beforehand. Would it be to try and get a routine, try and see if they can have some form of routine, try to control their environment that they can control before that? Is there talking to someone, a relative, finding someone that they can trust?
Well, I think like all these healthy lifestyle habits, sort of like give them a try. So it depends on how severe and how much your functioning and the quality of life is impacted. Sort of if it's minor, then you can try sort of to manage it on your own with the help. Like talk with someone. Don't just do it on your own. Google it. Find some good website. Don't sort of, but some from some reliable sources. And actually Wikipedia often have very good articles on mental health issues. So these are often good, quite comprehensive. But then I'm sure that in Australia you have a various kinds, like there's one organization called Mental Health First Aid in Australia, and they have some like these guidelines that they can use for various kind of illnesses. Read some of those things, so you sort of educate yourself on what it is that can help you sort of identify more what it is. But sort of the point is not to self-diagnose and self-treat. Sort of if this is if this really is issue, you need sort of to seek some professionals for that. So again, let it be a low threshold for seeking help, for going to a GP. There should be no higher, the threshold shouldn't be higher for mental health issues than it is for any physical issues that sort of you realize this is beyond what I can fix simply by myself.
Yeah, and Michaela, just on that, if you're in Australia, we don't often know, but Kids Helpline is available for people up to 25 years old, even though it's called Kids Helpline. You can call and ring up with any symptoms that you have and wondering how to handle it. You can call and that can help. Headspace, is a drop-in centre, but in lockdown, they've also got their eHeadspace portal on their website, which you can have direct conversations with trained mental health professionals. And reachout.com is another one as well. So yeah, Kids Helpline and Headspace are great resources for all of us here in Australia that are really accessible. And like you say, don't have to go to a doctor.
And there are even some as well for those who maybe are uncomfortable speaking on the phone. I've seen some that are offering like text services as well in SMS. But yeah, I think the take-home point is it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to talk about mental illness. It shouldn't be a taboo topic. Like a broken leg, if you have a broken leg, you're not going to walk around and go running on it with a broken leg. It will make the issue worse, I imagine. So definitely seek help, speak to people that you trust. Don't be ashamed to talk about it. And I think Torben, you said it, something about this too shall pass. So this season as well will pass. So is there any other final words you want to give to anyone who's listening, Bryan and Torben, before we wrap it up?
Yes, like I would like to say one thing to recognize when we're having like symptoms of mental illness, sort of the goal is oftentimes not just to get rid of the symptoms. You have to sort of figure out what is underneath this. Oftentimes there is underneath a depression, underneath anxiety, illness. There can be life issues that may need some work. So that sort of, I think it's important that we sort of recognize that when we're dealing with mental health issues. Doesn't mean that it's sort of a major big problem or that there's something terribly wrong with you. But most of us, we have issues that at some point can come out, and sort of the symptoms can come out sort of, but what we really need to address are the more underlying issues. And that's also when you can need help, like to get to those issues where you may need professional help to deal with that, because oftentimes we get blind, we go in our own tracks. It's difficult sort of to understand oneself better without talking with someone else, whether that's a good friend, family, or professional. So in that sense, the goal is not just to be symptom free, but if there are symptoms, ask yourself questions: is there something sort of more fundamental that I need to work on in order to resolve this issue and live an even better life in the future? So they can, like, if you have pain, like physical pain, sort of you recognize like the goal is just not just to take a painkiller and get rid of the pain and then continue running on that broken leg. But sometimes with mental illness, that's the approach, that we just try to get rid of the symptoms, but we don't fix and we don't address the underlying issues. that's very important to deal with what is the underlying thing.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate both your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Torben, for the work that you're doing and for really giving us some insight as well on, you know, the science behind mental illness and anxiety. And as well, Bryan, thanks so much. I'm sure there's a lot of our students that are very grateful to have your expertise and wisdom to support them. For those that are listening, thanks for taking your time to listen. And yeah, make sure that you check out those services that we said. If you have any other questions, feel free to send an email to Vic Youth or a Facebook message to Vic Youth. And yeah, let's just all keep each other in our thoughts and our prayers, and really be a community in the midst of this, be a virtual community while we can, and then this too shall pass. So thanks so much for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.